Hello.
Hello, family.
How y'all doing out there?
Thank you for hearing us out.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for for subscribing. Your comments, concerns, questions. We appreciate all of those, and we thank you all for hearing us out. I'm Renee,
I am Kyrie.
and today we have
We have
an interesting topic.
yeah,
I guess.
interesting to say the least. I would
Yes.
say
Mhm.
that over the last few episodes, we've
Mhm.
really talked about how, especially in this particular climate,
Right.
with the coronavirus and protests and all the stuff going on, how we think some of these things should go, and how we think that a lot of what's going on right now, it's good that we are seeing a reaction
Mhm. Right.
to the systemic racism and oppression that black people face on a daily basis.
Mhm.
We think that we also think that it won't necessarily get us where we think we ought to be.
Right. And that's because so much of this we have done before.
Yeah.
And so now we're just talking about trying to channel that energy into doing the thing that we say that we really want, to do and to accomplish. And that is, a real recognition of the problem and a real resolution to that problem.
Hmm.
And so we know that protesting is only going to take us so far. We don't want our people to get, you know, bored with the process, let's say, because you have folk who are like, well, protesting doesn't lead to anything, but it's that they don't know what the other thing is supposed to be in order for the protest to lead to. And so we've been having our discussions for the last couple of episodes on the things that sort of triggered our minds in regards to when we say a shift in perspective.
Hmm.
What does that mean? What does that feel? What does that look like? And so now we're going to lend
Yeah.
ourselves to that conversation
Yeah,
of
especially
what that really
because
is.
with everything going on, we've said a lot about
Mm-hmm.
how, yeah, really how we need a shift of perspective, how
Right.
we need, how we need just a new, way of confronting this.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about that, and how we say that it doesn't really matter what you build. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
really matter what you create if you don't have the mentality,
Right.
you know, to back that, to
Mm-hmm.
make that, into something.
Right.
Then all it's ever going to be is just a building. All it's ever
Right.
going to be is a prop. I think is the
Right.
word that I
You.
used.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think there might be a valid question out there about,
Mm-hmm.
well, you say that we ought that this isn't enough, that
Mm-hmm.
protesting isn't enough. That you
Right.
say that we ought to shift our perspective,
Mm-hmm.
shift our mentality,
Right.
right? But to what?
Right.
And we've always kept that open ended,
Right.
mainly because the answer we would say would be, well, to what works for you,
Right.
right? But I guess I would say to a lot of people that might sound like a non-answer, like something of a like a platitude.
Right. Because it doesn't sound concrete enough.
Hmm.
With protesting, that involves like concrete steps. You
Hmm.
literally have the sign. You
This,
literally
that,
go out in the
yeah.
street. You literally do these things, and so that sounds more concrete. And with our answers, at first we were like, you have to garner that for yourself, and that just sounds like you said, like it's just all platitude, fluff, and talk.
Hmm.
And so that's why we talked about in the couple of episodes about the different books that we read that led to a shift
Hmm.
in our thinking. And so now we're going to sort of give a more concrete
Yeah, because
answer to
if
that.
you're asking that, well, what perspective
Mm-hmm.
should we shift to?
Right.
What mentality should we adopt?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we always kept that open ended because, like we said, we don't like to give ultimatums and
Right.
say the steps that you have to take,
Right.
or how this has to look and
Right.
stuff like
And it
that.
only has to
And
be
yeah,
there.
it
Right.
only has to,
Right.
stuff like that. But if you're really asking us, or asking me,
Mm-hmm.
what did I shift my perspective to?
Mm-hmm.
What the answer is for me, I would
Mm-hmm.
say that systems and governments I don't trust any system,
Mm-hmm.
that puts your leaders, that creates a separation between the people
Mm-hmm.
and their representatives, and
Right.
the people
Mm-hmm.
who wield the power on their behalf.
Right.
You know, I don't trust any system that does that.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly because a government has two jobs, and I've
Mm-hmm.
said this before, that a government has to maintain the safety and prosperity of its people,
Right.
and also has to maintain its power and its
Right.
position,
Mm-hmm.
and that at some point
Mm-hmm.
a government is going to have to choose between giving prosperity to its people
Mm-hmm.
or maintaining its own power.
Right.
And at every rip we have seen throughout history, the
Mm-hmm.
government always chooses to maintain its own power.
Right. And we see that, in effect right
We're
now.
seeing it now,
Right.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, how is it that you can combat something like that,
Mm-hmm.
where you because there's a gap between the people and their representatives, and
Mm-hmm.
the people who are supposed to wield power
Mm-hmm.
for them. And
Right.
that's why a lot of the times we talk about, like, you have to do this for yourself. You have to do this for yourself, because we have a system now where you know you don't have to do it,
Right.
right? Where
Right.
you vote for someone else to do it for you,
Right.
to be informed for you, to
Mm-hmm.
make the choice
It's
for
for you.
you,
Right.
to make the vote for you. So you vote for the person who's going to vote for you,
Right.
right? And then you send them off into that world,
Right.
into that system,
Right.
right? And then there's that space where, and then you go about your business, not really paying attention to what's
Right.
going on, just assuming
Right.
that whomever you voted for is going to have your best interests at heart.
Right.
And rarely is that ever the case.
Correct.
You know, they
Correct.
go off and then they have their best interests
Right.
at heart. And then they manipulate the system, and they abuse the trust that you give them.
Mm-hmm.
I always find that it's like with Barack Obama, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
He had 8 years,
Mm-hmm.
8 years to tackle systemic racism, or even uh, the healthcare system,
Mm-hmm.
healthcare, right?
Mm-hmm.
8 years
Mm-hmm.
to do this.
Right.
And what did he do? He created, the Affordable Care Act,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which, as far as I'm concerned, forces American people
Mm-hmm.
to foot the bill
Right.
for, these exorbitant, healthcare prices.
Right.
And they're exorbitant because health insurance companies
Right.
are inflating the prices
Right.
to ridiculous degrees,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, so instead of you going after the health insurance companies,
Right.
you created a plan,
Right.
that the health insurance companies liked, actually, that they
Right.
backed.
Right.
You created a plan
Right.
that forces all of us, to pay it
Right.
instead of actually addressing the issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I find that very insulting. It's like, we sat here and watched your commercials and your political ads
Mm-hmm.
for months,
Mm-hmm.
talking about how you're gonna make a change and how you're gonna do all this stuff. Listen to your stupid inane speeches and
Right.
all these political debates between
Mm-hmm.
you and all these other candidates. All y'all talking about what it is you
Mm-hmm.
were going to do.
Right.
How y'all gonna make a change, all that stuff, all that rah-rah stuff.
Right.
And people voted for you.
Right.
You get the office.
Mm-hmm.
You are the president. And then nothing.
Right.
Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Nothing.
Right.
People should not have to look for the changes that you made.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't feel different under
Right.
Obama.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, it was this new, and then it all felt the same.
Right. And so here comes Trump. So now,
Yeah, here
so now we
comes
have
Trump.
Trump.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and Trump is,
He,
self-explanatory.
right.
I mean, look, he's
Right.
he's a moron.
Right.
He's
A
a
fascist
a
idiot.
demagogue.
Yes.
All that stuff. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, but like I said, Trump got elected for the same reason that Obama got elected. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
I said this on the show
Right.
before, but you take a people that feel serially disenfranchised,
Mm-hmm.
who feel like the system is not working for them, that it
Right.
does not have their best interests at heart, and then here comes a candidate who says all
All
the
the
things,
right.
all the right things,
Mm-hmm.
and saying, "I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to do that for you. I'm the one person, the one lone
Right.
person in the entire world that
Right.
can
And what do
actually
you have
make
to
things work.
lose?
I
You
know,
know,
yeah.
those type
The
of
only
things. Right.
thing that you have to do
Mm-hmm.
is vote for me, and I'll do it for you. I'm going
Right.
to do that, right? Like I said, and that's the same thing. That's how we felt, when Obama ran.
Mm-hmm.
We serially disenfranchised people. The system isn't on our side. We were going to put a black man in office who's going to be able to fix that.
Mm-hmm.
8 years,
Mm-hmm.
and here we are again.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, if Obama didn't work for us, then I am more than certain that Trump is not going to work for them,
Right.
and it's not working for them.
Right.
Like I said, extremism is not the reaction of a people in power.
That's right.
If your interests really were being met,
Mm-hmm.
then you wouldn't be out here like this.
Right.
You wouldn't be, going to these far right extremist
Right.
groups,
Mm-hmm.
doing these terrorist
Right.
organization stuff. You wouldn't even be doing that
Mm-hmm.
if your interests were being met.
Right.
But your interests aren't being met.
Right.
You aren't being taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
And your man is in office,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he got you looking at us,
Right.
looking at black people and Mexicans, and that it's a deep state, whatever.
Right.
When the reality is that the system
Right.
is not made to have your best interests
Mm-hmm.
at heart.
Mm-hmm.
That's a secondary issue.
Right.
It's behind maintaining its own power.
Right.
That's what systems do.
Mm-hmm.
It's failing you as much as it's failing us. It fails.
Right.
It fails.
Right.
That's all it can do.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone comes in and actually tries to do something different and or say that they have the best the people's interest at heart and
Right.
make that the priority, then that's the exception. That's the outlier.
Right.
That doesn't usually happen, and that person does not usually win.
Right.
So I'm just saying. So every system, every government, really, like, since the beginning of time, I always said that society is a giant Ponzi scheme. Like at the very, like the first recorded language is cuneiform,
Uh-huh.
and it was created so the government back then could keep more accurate tax records.
Right.
That's where the first recorded written language comes from.
Mm-hmm.
From that,
Taxes.
from taxes. Like ever since the beginning of time,
Taxes.
like thousands upon thousands of years
Right.
ago. It's like this is where this comes from.
Taxes.
Kings and peasants is really no different from presidents and citizens.
That's right.
It always boils down to that.
Mm-hmm.
So my
Mm-hmm.
answer to this is that, and that's really when I got it started about thinking
Mm-hmm.
about anarchy.
Right. Define what
Yeah, I'm
anarchy
going to
is,
define that.
because
Yeah, because I know when a lot of people think about anarchy, they think about
no
madness.
madness, the purge,
Yeah,
no government, no nothing, just total
just straight
bedlam. Right.
madness.
Yeah,
Right?
mayhem. Right.
Mayhem.
Right.
But that's not what anarchy is. I
Right.
mean, anarchy is a true philosophical political movement.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what some people make it out to be.
Of course.
Because they
Right.
any excuse to
Right.
go out and just
Right.
murder. You got an anarcho-capitalist,
Right.
which is a complete
Yeah, it's a
oxymoron,
moron. Correct.
all this stuff. But anarchy, like I said, is not about living without a system.
Right.
Living without rules. It's about living without rulers.
Right.
That the system as its place. Like we've talked before about social hierarchies and how
Mm-hmm.
these things are implicit in societies. Hierarchies, there's always going to be somebody, above you.
Right.
Right? And that right there, when you put someone in that position as
Right.
above, they're going to do everything in their power to maintain that position.
Mm-hmm.
And that means guaranteeing that people who are below them stay below them.
Right.
And that leads to all the other problems in our world, to all the other
Right.
problems.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the main issue that I feel we need to address.
Mm-hmm.
We need no rulers.
Mm-hmm.
No rulers. Instead
No
of
one in charge. Like no one's in charge, no rulers. I mean, no leaders.
Well, you can have leaders,
Right,
but not
rulers.
rulers.
Okay, okay.
There's a difference. Well,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, you really can't. Something like this isn't something. It's not necessarily a system
Correct.
because any system you creates that
Mm-hmm.
divide,
Right.
that type of hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm saying. That it is incumbent upon every person to have some type of personal stake and personal responsibility in the maintenance of the society,
So you're talking
right?
balance.
Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, that as long anarchy like I said, is more than a system. I call it a spirituality. It's a way of
Right.
thinking.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way of thinking, way of seeing how things are supposed to go,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there's a lot of people like, well, you could just if you just get rid of the system,
Right.
right? You just get rid of the system, get rid of all the laws and stuff like that, and then that's anarchy, right? I would say that if you can get rid of the system, right? You can get rid of all the law. You can get rid of all of that,
Mm-hmm.
and all you're ever going to do is end up creating, you know, something analogous to the thing that you destroyed.
Right.
It's kind of how you look at the Italian anarchists and how
Mm-hmm.
that gave rise to Mussolini.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
Or you
like
could just look at, the quote unquote founding fathers here, right? They fought against the British, right?
mhm,
They quote unquote defeated the British, right?
mhm.
And they end up setting up pretty much the exact same thing that the Brits had.
Well,
You know, it's pretty much the same, same setup. So,
not really.
not really. You don't think so?
No.
You don't think?
Well, there was nothing like America when America
Well,
first came on.
no. I'm talking about the setup of like your Congress, presidents, like that type of setup.
Well,
It's
yeah,
it's pretty much your
yeah,
Parliament.
and
It's pretty
all
much the
right.
same thing. That's what
Yeah,
I'm talking about. Yeah, the other stuff, no,
uh,
because they wanted
it was a representative.
right, exactly.
Yeah, which a lot of people pointed out when Trump won the presidency
Hmm.
that isn't
Yeah.
a real democracy
Well, yeah. Well,
because
yes.
everybody was like, how did this? No, he didn't win the popular vote.
Mm-hmm.
People did not overwhelmingly said they didn't want him,
Mm-hmm.
and he's president.
Right. Well, that's your electoral college. That goes back.
Yeah, and
Okay.
so
That's
I'm just saying,
that's a
so
whole
that
nother.
that that's
Right.
just is not a true democracy,
Right.
and that's what and I was that anarchy
Mm-hmm.
is democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Anarchy, I feel, is the only true path to democracy.
Mm-hmm.
That because anarchy is the one thing that truly addresses the separation, that separation of that space between those who rule and
Mm-hmm.
those who are ruled,
Right.
those who govern and those who are governed.
Right.
You know that as I was saying that you can get rid of the system as much as you want,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if you do that, and without shifting the thinking, you're just going to create another this,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you cannot internalize, anarchy, if you cannot internalize what that means, what is that? It's not about living without, you know, a structure.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about that,
Right.
but it's about creating something that maintains the balance between all people,
Mm-hmm.
that does not create rulers,
Right.
that does not create this this ladder that
Mm-hmm.
puts people above,
Mm-hmm.
that creates something a bit more, like I said, horizontal.
Right. You want to get rid of that verticality,
Yeah,
basically.
something a bit more horizontal, something that a bit more level,
Mm-hmm.
but something that prioritizes, you know, its people
Right.
over itself.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding that itself is just its people.
Right.
That we've had that conversation
Mm-hmm.
many times before. That systems and stuff like that. It's just people.
Right.
But you get caught up in this loop,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you think you're looking at all the things outside of yourself. You're looking at the buildings. You're looking at the presidents. You're looking at the senators, congressmen, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When that's not it. That's not it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to address the people.
Right.
And the thing is that the people are dependent upon the system. And the only way that they know how to govern, quote unquote, themselves is through creating a system much like this, where there is, the leader and those who follow,
Mm-hmm.
And as long as that's the case, there's always going to be problems. It's always going to be this, right? You can't you can't create like this, but you also can't destroy like this either, right? Like I said, if you were to just get rid of all of this,
Mm-hmm.
right? If the whole system now were to just collapse and go away,
Mm-hmm.
like I say, it will leave a vacuum, right? It'll leave a vacuum, and what's going to rush in there is all the problems, all the water, all everything is going to rush in there, and
Mm-hmm.
what's going to come out of that is the very thing that you destroyed, right?
Yes, and that's because you know how people think.
Yeah, how
This
people
is
stratify.
yeah. This
That's
is
like I was
this is
saying,
what this
anarchy is
right.
more than a system.
Mm-hmm.
It's a philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
and if you don't understand that,
Mm-hmm.
if you have not internalized it, if you don't take personal responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
for the maintenance of your society, if the people don't do that,
Mm-hmm.
then you can't create it, then you can't build it.
Mm-hmm.
And every system so far after that, be after that, every system that you create will always be plagued with these same old problems,
Mm-hmm.
with the same old failings, these same old trappings, because at the end of the day, hierarchies are what breed these problems. And we've talked about how you try to create a culture that resists that.
Mm-hmm.
And you try to create a society that resists that. You
Mm-hmm.
try to do these things that resist,
Mm-hmm.
that familiarity
Right.
of, leader, follower, king, peasant, stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. You try to, and you do that by everyone having, to do a part.
Right. So I remember mentioning that it seems as if you know what we are asking is for people to work against what they have always been doing.
Mm.
And remember,
Yeah.
and because I always say that in order for us to move the way that we say that we want to move, is that we have to become the people who we say that we should have always been.
Hmm.
So we have been operating, you know, from this verticality, point of view.
From this above,
Yeah,
below.
above, below,
Hmm.
for so long that we think
That's what it is.
that's what it is.
In
And
some sense, yes, that is
mm,
what it is.
right,
And that's the problem.
right. But the thing is that we can always,
Do something else.
yes, we can change that.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be that because that's what it's
Hmm.
been, and so.
But I know what you're asking. But what are you saying? What are you saying?
Hmm.
Right? You're talking
Right.
about creating a
Uh
system
huh.
without systems,
Right.
without rulers. How do
Right.
you even do that?
Right.
And that's something that we're going to address in, part two
Hmm.
of this conversation. But right now, I want to, because I know that a lot of people might not really get
Hmm.
what I mean, when I'm talking about the separation and the
Hmm.
problems, stuff like that, and, rulers and
Right.
how this always boils down to that.
Hmm.
But there's a passage in one of my favorite books, it's Brothers Karamazov, written by Fyodor Dostoevsky,
Hmm.
right? And there's a part, it's really early.
Hmm.
There's a part in this book, it's chapter 5, so be it, that I think when I read it, it really helped to paint the picture
Hmm.
of the problem, like of the main problem with a majority of human societies.
Right.
Nope.
Yeah.
One of the books
Another
fell.
book fail. Right.
Yeah. Y'all can't see, but we are surrounded
By
by
books. Right.
books, a whole bunch of books.
That's right.
But yeah, so I want to read this little passage
Hmm.
with some stuff. We talked about it yesterday, and yeah,
And you stop at certain
yeah,
points
we
and
talked and
Claire. Hmm.
discuss certain points and stuff
Hmm.
like that. But yeah, okay. So in this chapter, just to give some a little background,
Right.
you have Ivan, who is the son of one of the. They're waiting. They're at a monastery, and Ivan, who's a kind of an intellectual, is having a conversation with a lot of the other monks and the
Right.
clergymen at this monastery, and they're talking about the separation between church
Church and
and state.
state.
And
Hmm.
Ivan is arguing that there should be no separation between church and state. And there are some other people who are trying to understand what he's trying to
Right.
say, who don't get it, who don't really understand, the point that he's trying to
To make.
make. And he's talking about a article that he wrote
Hmm.
when he was having an argument with another churchman
Right.
about this particular subject,
Hmm.
right? So, yeah, let me see.
So how are you going to define church in this
Oh,
in this
well, yeah,
sense?
because in the
Right.
chapter they're talking about separation between church and
Hmm.
state. What I mean by what helps really, like, if you change church
Hmm.
to people,
Right.
right, and state to government,
Right.
and then you really start to see
Right. It works.
how
Hmm.
this all plans out for me. So this is Theodore,
Hmm.
not Theodore. This is Ivan.
Ivan.
Theodore's
Yeah,
the
if he's
writer.
the writer, the
Yeah,
author.
this passage right here. I start from the proposition that this mixing of elements, that is, of the essence of church and state taken separately, will of course go on eternally, despite the fact that it is impossible, and that it will never be brought not only to a normal but even to any degree of compatible relationship, because there is a lie at the very basis of the matter, right?
Hmm.
Like I said, systems are just people.
Right.
It's impossible for those things to be separate. If you address the system
Right.
without addressing the people, then you're not addressing anything.
Correct.
But people have that separation in mind
Hmm.
between them and the things that they create that govern them.
Hmm.
And as long as you have that, which is like he said, which can go on eternally,
Right.
you
Hey, we
know,
started the problem wrong.
yeah, you will
Right.
always start the problem wrong, and that
Hmm.
these two elements are always essentially connected.
Hmm.
But that separation in from a philosophical sense that
Hmm.
people have in mind, as long as you have that, you're always going to run across these types of
Right.
problems, right? So let me continue.
Hmm.
Compromise between the state and the church on such questions as courts, for example, is, in my opinion, in its perfect and pure essence, impossible. The churchman with whom I argued maintains that the church occupies a precise and definite place within the state. I objected that, on the contrary, the church should contain in itself the whole state, and not merely occupy a certain corner of it, and that if for some reason that is impossible now, then in the essence of things it undoubtedly should be posited as the direct and chief aim of the whole further development of Christian society.
Hmm.
Right? What he's saying there
Hmm.
is that the church and the state are two separate entities.
Right.
The churchman thinks that the church needs to maintain its position in that
Right.
separation,
Correct.
and that because of those clearly defined rules, they clearly define separation. That's where the church is supposed to exist. That's the only place it can exist.
Hmm.
Whereas Ivan is suggesting that that separation in itself, like he posited in the beginning,
Right.
is not true,
Right.
and that the church the church's whole goal is to change society, much like people
Right.
are trying to change their society.
Right.
Our whole goal is to change the world that we're in, to address the problems that we are facing,
Right.
right?
And again, think of the church as
Yeah,
people.
as people,
Right.
right? So the whole issue here is
Hmm.
that you have the separation, and if the people want to change the system,
Hmm.
then the people have to understand that space that they are relegated into, that one little corner that allows them to be the people.
Hmm.
Much like when we talked about culture and how under the boot is the only place where black people can exist, and if you get from under the boot, then you won't be black
Hmm.
anymore. That
Hmm.
you're going to have to
That
create
struggle.
another
Right.
identity
Hmm.
for yourself,
Hmm.
right? As long that space is where the church is allowed to exist. That space is where
Hmm.
people is allowed to exist,
Hmm.
right? But and as long as that's the case, you're only ever going to get so much, and you're
Right.
never really going to be able to address
Address
the
the problem. Right.
issues. So if the people want to change, the system, then the people have to recognize that they are the system, and
Right.
the people have to become
Right.
the system, much like the church has to become the state,
Right.
right? So let me continue. There's another part here that where he elucidates on this part a little further,
Right.
right? The whole point of my article is that in ancient times, during its first 3 centuries, Christianity was revealed on earth only by the church, and was only the church. But when the pagan Roman state desired to become Christian, it inevitably so happened that having become Christian, it merely included the church in itself, but itself continued to be, as before, a pagan state in a great many of its functions. That's something
Mm-hmm.
that you said
Mm-hmm.
before about how, America's greatest weapon is its flexibility.
Right.
That it takes just enough.
Right.
It changes just enough to maintain exactly what it is.
Right.
Much like Rome,
Right.
becoming Christian,
Right.
but it didn't really change
Change. Right.
anything. It continued to act as if it was a pagan
A pagan
a
state.
pagan state,
Right.
because for all intents and purposes, it was.
Right.
And you may have changed what religion you believe in,
Right.
but you didn't change the system.
System. Right.
It was the aesthetic over the
Right.
form over function,
Function.
like we've
Right.
talked many times before, right? Essentially, this is undoubtedly what had to happen, right? But Rome as a state retained too much of pagan civilization and wisdom, for example, the very aims and basic principles of the state. Whereas Christ's church, having entered the state, no doubt could give up none of its own basic principles, of that rock on which it stood, and could pursue none but its own aims, once firmly established and shown to it by the Lord himself, among which was the transforming of the whole world, and therefore of the whole ancient pagan state, into the church. Thus, that is, for future purposes, it is not the church that should seek a definite place for itself in the state, like any social organization or organization of men for religious purposes. As the author, I was objecting to references to the church, but on the contrary, every earthly state must eventually be wholly transformed into the church and become nothing else but the church, rejecting whichever of its aims are incompatible with those of the church. And all of this will in no way demean it, will take away neither its honor nor its glory as a great state, nor the glory of its rulers, but will only turn it from a false, still pagan, and erroneous path onto the right and true path that alone leads to eternal goals. That is why the author of the book on the principles of the ecclesiastical court would have judged correctly if, while seeking and presenting these principles, he had looked upon them as a temporary compromise, still necessary in our sinful and unfulfilled times, and nothing more. But as soon as the inventor of these principles makes so bold as to declare the principles he is presenting, some of which Father Isov had just enumerated, to be immovable, elemental, and eternal, he goes directly against the church and its wholly eternal and immovable destiny. That is the whole of my article, a full summary of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So basically, with that concept in mind, thinking about the church as people, as the
Mm-hmm.
people, is that instead of, you know, you having this outside thing where the government is,
Mm-hmm.
the ruler, basically, is
The
that,
state.
yeah, the state,
Yeah.
basically, is that you want, you want the people there, or better yet, you want to bring them into the people.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want the
Yeah, like
separation.
it's not about putting the right people in
Place,
place,
right,
because the system itself is broken,
right,
right?
right,
And when we say with the system, and like I just said earlier, that there is no system, it's just people,
right.
is that our perspectives are skewed.
Mm-hmm.
Our perspectives and our, actions will create these things,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to be wary of the things that we think are taking us away when they are enmeshing us even further.
Right. So when people talk about the separation of church and state,
Hmm.
right?
All right.
What is it that they're speaking as if the church, operates, differently from the state, and that
As an
church,
independent thing.
right, and that the church should stay out of the government's business, and the government should stay out of the church's business,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what we're saying is that that gap, that separation between the church and the state, that's where the people are, right? That's
Okay.
that's where
Yeah.
the people are.
Mm-hmm.
And so the church needs to come to the people. Or the people need to bring the church to it, and the people need to bring the government, I guess, or
But
the
the
state
people
to
is the
it.
church.
Yes.
The people is the system.
Mm-hmm.
But it is our perspective that puts these things outside of us,
Right.
right? And that's where all the problems come from.
Mm-hmm.
See, like I said, the church isn't just any social organization or organization of men for religious purposes.
Mm-hmm.
It is the entity
Right.
upon which you are able to find your eternal salvation, right?
Mm-hmm.
The people is not just another group.
Right.
It's not just it is the people,
Right.
one and only. And if the people want to change things, if the people want to change the world that they're living in, change the system, then they have to understand that the the government, the state,
Mm-hmm.
these things which they can't endeavor to find a place in the
Right.
current system as it is.
Right.
Or try to change your position on the inside.
Right.
That's not how these things are going to go. And that's what we mean by like you're protesting and you're doing all of this, and that's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
Because for one, you're doing the one thing that the system tells you, you
Can't
can
do.
do to
Right.
try to change it.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that it changes only so much.
Right.
So you can go about this as much as you want to. It's not going to give you the change you're looking for because you're just looking for a better position
Right.
in a broken system.
Right. That's the problem.
That's
Right.
the problem.
Mm-hmm.
You need to, for one, recognize, the fallacy in your logic to be able to then see the fallacy of the logic in itself.
Self. Correct.
Right? And then you need to be able to create your own, like we say, your own infrastructure, your own way of being. And instead of trying to find a way for that to exist inside of
Right.
the system has to find a way to exist inside
Right.
of what you have created.
Right.
Then you can relegate, the brokenness
Mm-hmm.
of this system to its own pocket, to its own corner. You can correct it.
Right.
You can stop the fallacy, stop the false gap. But like he said, and that the churchman maintains that the church can only be the church inside of that separation, with that
Mm-hmm.
separation.
Mm-hmm.
And that the church's holy mission can only be accomplished with that separation.
Mm-hmm.
Ivan is saying that you're only going to be able to position yourself in a broken system and you'll never be able to correct it.
Mm-hmm.
And that if you want to correct it, then that what did he say about it? That immovable, elemental, and eternal mission
Mm-hmm.
that you all have, you will never be able to accomplish. That like I said before, to be able to move
Mm-hmm.
the things around you, you have to paradoxically be immovable.
Mm-hmm.
You need to stick to your guns. You need to understand so much, so intuitively
Mm-hmm.
what it is that you're doing, that everything around you has to accommodate for you.
Right.
That's what we're saying, that where true power comes from. Where we talked about the Montgomery bus boycotts.
Right.
Like we said, that wasn't a building.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't, an institution. It was a mentality.
Right.
I'm not riding your bus.
Right.
Period.
Mm-hmm.
And a whole bunch of infrastructure propped up around that.
Right.
Around that, that mentality of we're not riding your buses.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And like you said, the biggest mistake we ever made was getting back on the bus.
Mm-hmm.
Because instead, when the system came to you, you could have put it in its place in relation to you, but instead you moved yourself
Right.
to relate to the system, a broken system.
Mm-hmm.
You tried for a better position in a broken system,
Mm-hmm.
and it all falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's the lesson.
Yeah,
that's the lesson. Mm-hmm.
That gap maintains.
Mm-hmm.
The separation maintains, and you have not really changed the system.
Mm-hmm.
All you have done is positioned yourself better in it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to actually change things, that's going to take, something else. It's
Right.
going to take, like we just read, it's
Mm-hmm.
going to take anarchy. Like I said, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? This is what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Anarchy, a system that resists rulers, a system that resists social hierarchies.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we mean.
Right.
So there's another part here, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because above that you have someone who who's having a hard time reconciling, the
Right.
conversation that's going on right now.
Right.
He said, and this is one of the clergymen who is making a contrary point here.
Right.
Who says, "Well, sir, I confess that you have now reassured." Wait, hold up. Yeah, because this is wait, because Father Pete, both of them, both there are two characters are there, two clergymen who are having a really don't understand
Saying
what's being said
right.
here, right? So, in short, Father Pete has said again, stressing each word. According to certain theories, which have become only too clear in our 19th century, the church ought to be transforming itself into the state, from a lower to a higher species, as it were, so as to disappear into it eventually, making way for science, the spirit of the age, and civilization. And if it does not want that and offer resistance, then as a result, it is allotted only a certain corner, as it were, in the state, and even that under control, as is happening in our time everywhere in modern European lands. Yet, according to the Russian understanding and hope, it is not the church that needs to be transformed to the state as from a lower to a higher type, but on the contrary, the state should end by being accounted worthy of becoming only the church alone, and nothing else but that. And so be it, so be it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. See, that's not what we're saying.
Right.
That's not what Ivan is saying.
Right.
It's not that the church becomes the only state that there is.
Right.
The church has to reconcile itself before it can change anything.
Mm-hmm.
Because the church, as it is only a facet of a pagan worldview, of a
Right.
pagan system, right? If the church were to just adopt the mannerisms of this system and try to become the state that way, and as if from a lower to a higher species, if it was to try to transform that way, you know, it is confining, it is constraining
Mm-hmm.
things down. It is setting itself up in opposition to its reality, like you said. That instead of us, instead of us, being kept out of the way and a lot of the other little corner, we want to keep them out of the way and a lot of little corner. That, like you said, that's not the opposite.
Right.
That's not what you're trying to do
Right.
here. You're trying to change everything to where
Mm-hmm.
nothing needs to be relegated that
Mm-hmm.
way. Nothing needs to be, put in its place that way. You're creating a new order, a new way of looking at things, a new way of having a system,
Mm-hmm.
right? But instead, like we said, putting black faces in this won't fix this,
Right.
right? What
I think that's been
yeah,
made abundantly clear now.
yeah. And what Father Paisley is saying is that instead of the president being the ultimate power, it's
Right.
the Pope that's going to be the ultimate
Right.
power.
And
The
we're like,
Pope is going to
nah, that's
no,
not what
that's
we're
not what
talking
we're
about.
saying.
Right.
That's not what we're saying,
Right.
right? And here we go. This is Moisoff, the other clergyman here. Well, sir, I confess that you have now reassured me somewhat. Moisoff grinned, recrossing his legs again. So far as I understand it, this then would be the realization of some ideal, an infinitely remote one, at the second coming. That is as you please. A beautiful utopian dream of the disappearance of wars, diplomats, banks, and so on, something even resembling socialism. And here I was thinking you meant it all seriously, and that the church might now, for instance, be judging criminals and sentencing them to flogging, hard labor, perhaps even capital punishment.
Mm-hmm. No, that's
It's
not.
completely,
Yeah, just completely
missed
missed
the
the
point.
right.
Like I
Right.
said, writes it off as some utopian dream. A lot
Right.
of people do. You see that
Yes.
in real life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just write as some utopian thing
Right. They think this like it's
because they cannot see a
they
world
can't see
without that.
that. Right. Right.
That it must be some far off dream. No, it's
Mm-hmm.
always going to have to. It's always going to be this. It's always going to be this. So
No.
Ivan says,
Right.
but if even now there were only ecclesiastical courts, even now the church would not sentence criminals to hard labor or capital punishment. Crime on the whole way and the whole way of looking at it would then undoubtedly have to change.
Mm-hmm.
Little by little, of course. Not all at once, not immediately, but still quite soon. Right? This is what we're talking about. This is more than just system. This is a shift in perspective, a true shift in perspective. And then Moisel says, are you serious? Right? And Ivan says, if everything became the church, then the church would excommunicate the criminal and the disobedient and not cut off their heads. Ivan Fyodorovich continued. Where, I ask you, will the excommunicated man go? He would then have to go away not only from men, as now, but also from Christ. For by his crime he would have rebelled not only against men, but also against Christ's church. That is so now, too, of course, strictly speaking, but it is not avowed. and the criminal of today all too often bargains with his conscience. I stole, he says, but I have not gone against the church. I am not an enemy of Christ. Rationalizing, like you said, time and again, that is what the criminal of today says himself. Well, but when the church takes the place of the state, it would be very difficult for him to say that unless he means to reject the church all over the earth, to say all are mistaken, all are in error, all are a false church, and I alone, a murderer and a thief, in the true Christian church. It is very difficult to say this to oneself. It requires formidable conditions, circumstances that do not often occur. Now, on the other hand, take the church's own view of crime. Should it not change from the present, almost pagan view, and from the mechanical cutting off of the infected member, as is done now for the preservation of society, and transform fully now, and not falsely, into the idea of the regeneration of man anew, of his restoration and salvation, right? Like he said, people, like we alluded to earlier, people rationalize the decisions that they have to make. Like we said, this is a criminogenic society, right? That means that being a criminal is the direct result of it, right? But like to him, it's like I didn't do anything wrong. I still it's like hearing that, oh, I got mouths to feed, I got things, I got bills to pay, stuff like that, and so you become a criminal, right? Because that's the one way the system allows you to exist, right? And so you justify that, you rationalize it. But if the church becomes the state, if the people right become the state, then you are going to have a harder time justifying itself, because now you don't have a system that is at odds with the people, that is turning you into a criminal, it'll be you. And the only way you're going to be able to justify yourself in that is if you say, well, everything's wrong, everyone's wrong, all of it's wrong, I am the one right, the one person that's right. And so that's a much harder logical leap to make, and like you said, and even the church is going to have to change the way it goes about punishing criminals. What you said is almost a pagan, this pagan view of punishing criminals. It is going to have to go from punishment to, like he said, to regeneration, restoration, and salvation. It's going to have to go. It's going to have to change that. We ourselves, we in the Black community, are going to have to change how we look at these elements in our society. We are going to have to change that, and that's the only way we're going to be able to maintain the moral rightness in this conversation, to make it harder for other people to make that logical leap. Right? Now here comes Moisov. But what are you talking about? Again, I cease to understand. Some kind of dream again? Something shapeless and impossible to understand as well? Excommunication. What excommunication? I suspect you're simply amusing yourself, Ivan. Right? And like we said, well, if it's not this, then what is it going to be? If you're telling me I can't do this, then what is it?
What you mean, rehabilitation or whatever you're talking about? They should be punished for their crimes. If they did something wrong, they should be punished harshly. But you can do that when you have the separation. The government, you can make that leap. But when it's the people, it's much harder to make those kind of rationales and decisions.
What do you mean? What are you talking about? So we get that a lot.
Because people are gonna do stuff wrong. You're gonna always have crime, right? That's you're gonna always have crime. You're gonna always have people that go against the grain. And so then you have to ask yourself, is going against the grain necessarily a crime? To where you have to put people in jail.
If you shift your perspective on crime and how you go about recognizing it, how you go about rectifying it, but in and of itself, you're going to get rid of a lot of that crime. Like I said, evil is an absence. It's the absence of something. Right. Light at its very nature, gets rid of the darkness. Not because it's intentionally trying to do that. Not because that it's trying. It doesn't have to try.
It's just what it
does.
That's
just what it does. That's what it is. And the elder, who is the big authority at the church, I think it really elucidates that point pretty well. Right, when he chimes in. But in reality, it is so even now. The elder suddenly spoke, and everyone turned to him at once. If it were not for Christ's church, indeed there would be no restraint on the criminal in his evil doing, and no punishment for it later. Real punishment, that is, not a mechanical one such as just been mentioned, which only chafes the heart in most cases, but a real punishment, the only real, the only frightening and appeasing punishment which lies in the acknowledgement of one's own conscience,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that recognition of the person, of the criminal, knowing that they have done something
Something
wrong.
wrong. Mm-hmm.
That's the true punishment, right? How is that, may I ask? Moissauf inquired with the liveliest curiosity. Here's how it is, the elder began. All this exile to hard labor and formerly with flogging does not reform anyone, and above all does not even frighten almost any criminal, and the number of crimes not only does not diminish but increases all the more. Surely you would admit that. And it turns out that society thus is not protected at all. For although the harmful member is mechanically cut off and sent far away out of sight, another criminal appears at once to take his place, perhaps even two others. This is
Mm-hmm.
an old book now.
Yeah, this is
This is an old book.
right. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, that sounds
Very
very,
familiar.
very familiar. This is what we mean by nothing's ever new. And we've
Right.
been dealing with these problems for a very,
Very
very
long
long
time.
time.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, if anything protects society, even in our time, it even reforms the criminal himself and transforms him into a different person, again, it is Christ's law alone, which manifests itself in the acknowledgement of one's own consciousness. Remember,
Mm-hmm.
Christ, the people.
Right.
The
The
people
people.
now.
Right.
Only if he acknowledges his guilt as a son of Christ's society, that is, of the church, will he acknowledge his guilt before society itself, that is, before the church. Thus, the modern criminal is capable of acknowledging his guilt before the church alone and not before the state.
Mm-hmm.
Like we said, that justification,
Right.
right? You know you're doing something wrong. You know you do, but you justify it as that's the only way
Wait. Right.
to get anything done.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way to do anything. You can justify yourself before the state,
State. Right.
but not before
With
your
the
people,
people.
right? If it were so that judgment belonged to society as the church, then it would know whom to bring back from excommunication and reunite with itself. But now the church, having no active jurisdiction, but merely the possibility of moral condemnation alone, withholds from actively punishing the criminal of its own accord. It does not excommunicate him, but simply does not leave him without paternal guidance. Moreover, it even tries to preserve full Christian communion with the criminal, admitting him to church services, to the holy gifts, giving him alms, and treating him more as a captive than as a wrongdoer. As what will become of the and what will become of the criminal? O Lord, if Christian society too, that is the church, rejected him in the same way that civil law rejects him and cuts him off. What would become of him if the church too punished him with excommunication each time immediately after the law of the state had punished him? Surely there could be no greater despair, at least for a Russian criminal. For Russian criminals still have faith.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Though who knows, perhaps a terrible thing would happen then, the loss of faith perhaps would occur in a desperate heart of the criminal. And what then? But the church, like a mother tender and loving, withholds from active punishment, for even without her punishment, the wrongdoer is already too painfully punished by the state court, and at least someone should pity him. And it withholds above all, because the judgment of the church is the only judgment that contains the truth, and for that reason it cannot essentially and morally be combined with any other judgment, even in a temporary compromise. Here it is not possible to strike any bargains. The former criminal, they say, rarely repents, for even the modern theorists themselves confirm in him the idea that his crime is not a crime, but only a rebellion against an unjustly oppressive force. Like, this is an old book now.
Right.
Like we said, all this is sounding very, very familiar. Society cuts him off from itself quite mechanically by the force that triumphs over him and accompanies that excommunication with hatred, so at least they say about themselves in Europe, with hatred and complete indifference and forgetfulness of his subsequent fate as their brother. Like we said before,
Mm-hmm.
you're above us.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you are above,
Right.
that you are well off.
Yeah.
But you look down on us with
Mm-hmm.
condemnation and hatred and indifference,
Mm-hmm.
forgetting that we are all being oppressed.
Right.
Right? Thus, all of this goes on without the least compassion of the church, For in many cases, there already are no more churches at all, and remains are just churchmen in splendid church buildings, while the churches themselves have long been striving to pass from the lower species, the church, to a higher species, the state, in order to disappear into it completely. So it seems to be, at least in Lutheran lands. And in Rome, it is already 1,000 years since the state was proclaimed in place of the church. And therefore, the criminal is not conscious of himself as a member of the church, and excommunicated, he sits in despair. And if he returns to society, it is not seldom with such hatred that society itself, as it were, now excommunicates him. What will be the end of it, you may judge for yourself. In many cases, it would appear to be the same with us, but the point is precisely that besides the established courts, we have, in addition, the church as well, which never loses communion with the criminal as a dear and beloved son, and above that there is preserved, even if only in thought, the judgment of the church, not active now, but still living for the future, if only as a dream, and unquestionably acknowledged by the criminal himself, by the instinct of his soul. What has just been said here is also true, that if indeed the judgment of the church came, and in its full force, that is, if the whole of society turned into the church alone, then not only would the judgment of the church influence the reformation of the criminal, as it can never influence it now, but perhaps crimes themselves would indeed diminish at an incredible rate. Shift of perspective, like we said. And the church, too, no doubt, would understand to the future criminal and the future crime, in many cases quite differently from now, and will be able to bring the excommunicated back to deter the plotter, to regenerate the fallen. It is true, the elder smiled, that now Christian society itself is not yet ready, and stands only on 7 righteous men. But as they are never wanting, it abides firmly all the same, awaiting its complete transfiguration from society as still an almost pagan organization into one universal and sovereign church. And so be it, so be it, if only at the end of time, for this alone is destined to be fulfilled. And there is no need to trouble oneself with times and seasons, for the mystery of times and seasons is in the wisdom of God, in his foresight, and in his love. And that which by human reckoning may still be rather remote, by divine predestination may already be standing on the eve of its appearance, at the door. So be that too. So be it. Right? Now, what he said there is that if you shift your perspective, like we said earlier, on crime, on how these things appear, then you introduce light into the darkness. That in itself helps to rectify the situation, right? And that the organization has a lot of work to do.
Right.
We, the people,
have a lot of
work to do.
Right.
Because we can't think about shifting everything else if we aren't recognizing, the fallacies in ourselves,
right,
the faults in ourselves. And like he said, Christianity stands, on only 7 righteous men, as much how, what W.E.B. Du Bois talks about the talented 10.
Right.
How you always have those few movers and shakers, and that has always been the case. But if we want things to change, that can no longer be the case anymore. Right. It can't be the talented 10. Right. It can't be 7 righteous men. It has to be all of us.
Right.
And the institutions that we have created that have adopted that verticality, like you said, the pagan view, that the church in itself in this day has just become a pagan institution.
Right.
That the people, we have become just a pagan institution. And that if we want to get to the real work, to the real things, then we are going to have to shift our perspective in order to move everything else.
Right.
And that, like we said, to shift our perspective, we have to paradoxically be immovable.
Right.
We have to stick to our guns. We have to make it real. In everything we do and everything that we say, we have to make it real. Right? Right. So, it continues. So be it, Father Paisley confirmed with reverent severity. Strange, most strange, Moisov pronounced, not so much fervently as with, so to speak, a sort of repressed indignation. What seems so strange to you? Father Isov cautiously inquired. But really, what are you talking about? Moisov exclaimed, as if suddenly bursting out. The state is abolished on earth and the church is raised to the level of the state? It's not even ultramontanism, it's arch-ultramontanism. Even Pope Gregory VII never dreamed of such a thing.
just missing everything. Just all the points all over here. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You have been pleased to understand it in a completely opposite sense, Father Paisley spoke sternly. It is not the church that turns into the state, you see. That is Rome and its dream. That is the third temptation of the devil. But on the contrary, the state turns into the church. It rises up to the church and becomes the church all over the earth,
Hmm.
which is the complete opposite of ultra monotheism and of Rome and of your interpretation, and is simply the great destiny of orthodoxy on earth. This star will show forth from the east.
Hmm.
Right? What he's saying there is that if the church does its part,
Hmm.
if the church is able to rectify itself,
Hmm.
change itself, and become what it was supposed to be, if the church were to do that, then in and of itself, it'll fix a lot of the issues that it's facing.
Hmm.
And then through that, through being that, and not trying to, find a place in a broken system,
Hmm.
being what it is at all instances, the system in itself will have to change to accommodate that because you are the people.
Right. So how is it that you go about creating a society, right?
Mm-hmm.
The people without prisons and without handcuffs.
You asking me?
Yes, I already know. I have an idea of what you're going to say. And the only reason why I'm even addressing it this way is because, I remember mentioning this and, of course, reading Chinua Achebe and others,
Mm-hmm.
where, you know, we had where there were no prisons, right? And so, in order for you to even have something like that, that means that certain behaviors that we see today, right? They were not criminalized,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, because you know we had no jails. But we did, we definitely banned this and did the excommunication. We did,
Mm-hmm.
those things.
Ostracized,
Yeah,
yeah.
we did those things.
Yeah.
But we didn't have, prisons. And so, like I said, in order for us to do the things that we
But the argument can be made
right,
that, you talked about Chinua Achebe,
hmm,
right? That Umufia, which is a village,
hmm,
in Things Fall Apart,
right,
the book we're referencing right now,
right,
is that Umufia was a village of a couple thousand people, maybe.
maybe more than that. But it was,
Yeah, it's a couple thousand people.
you're talking about,
That's
the
pretty.
Igbo.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah, but
it's
Umufia was one village of the Igbo. It wasn't
yeah,
all Igbo, but
yeah.
Umufia.
Well, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just saying is that you have a village of like 10,000, 15,000 people,
yeah,
maybe,
yeah.
right?
Maybe even more. But that's I think
Like
is
10, I think
yeah,
15,000 is good.
yeah. It's a good
Good
enough.
estimate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
right. And you have, but today we're not. There is no small village. Like you're
Right.
talking about a society with
Millions of
millions on
people.
millions of
Right.
people, billions
No, but I'm just saying,
sometimes.
just how is it today? Like, how did
Yeah,
we
that's
get
what I'm
to that? That's what I'm
saying.
saying.
Is
How
that,
did we get to that?
it's easier to maintain those things on
A
a
small level.
on a
Right.
smaller level,
Hmm.
right? When you're trying to govern, millions
Millions of
upon billions of people,
right.
you may think you may need
Hmm.
such extreme unilateral action as to
Hmm.
put someone in prison
Right.
and to criminalize every little thing
Hmm.
because there is so many people and it is such an element
Right.
in our society.
So how do we? How
So
do
how do you
we?
get to that? And like we
Right.
said, in this,
Hmm.
the state the state controls violence in
Okay.
that the
Yes.
state is
Right.
the only thing that is able to levy violence,
And
right?
it's only supposed.
Like a police officer
Right.
can shoot you and it'll be fine, but if I shoot a police officer, we're gonna have a problem,
Right.
right? Like I
Hmm.
said, I can't invade a foreign country, but the government can.
Right.
Like I
Well, it
said,
does. Right.
yeah, that's what I'm
Right.
saying.
Hmm.
They can do that,
Hmm.
right? They're the ones who have monopolized violence, right?
Correct.
And if we want to change things, a lot of the conversation goes to where we are going to have to take violence back. We are going to
Yes.
have to do our own type of violence, our own type of thing.
Hmm.
But like I said, you have to be wary of the things that take you deeper into this system.
Right.
If you have a system that was born out of violence, if you adopt violence, what do you think you're going to create?
Right. You're gonna. Well, yes.
You know,
You're gonna get
we're
what you
going to
have
do
right here.
we're
Right.
going to do it differently. We're not going to do this.
You're only doing it differently so far as in form. Like
Yeah, that is
that's it.
yeah.
That's not.
But even that,
Hmm.
it's the same form, same function.
Yeah.
It's all the same thing.
Right.
is just with your own face on it, right?
Right.
And like we said, if you want to rectify, the crime, if you want to
Mm-hmm.
create a society without prisons and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that, then it's going to take a whole different temperament, and
Right.
it's going to take something smaller,
Mm-hmm.
not grand unilateral gestures,
Right.
because you can't govern millions
Just,
upon millions of
right.
people, because you're going to generalize,
Right.
and when you do that, you fail.
Yes.
You fail.
Right. We talked about that
Yeah, we
already. Right.
talked about that before.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to do something smaller and
Mm-hmm.
gradual and slower.
Right.
You're going to have to go community by community,
Right.
block by
By block.
block,
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood by neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
and address the issues in every neighborhood and every community, and allow those communities to make those decisions, to say the things that they need, the
Mm-hmm.
people who live there,
Right.
to say, this is what we need, this is where the problems are coming from, and address every community at that level,
Right.
and only then.
And I'm glad that you stress at that level,
Hmm.
because that's where it has to work. It
Yeah,
has to
it
work
will not
literally
come
from the
through,
people. Right. It's not going to come
some
from.
giant sweeping mandate through
Right.
some law,
Mm-hmm.
which is just something we're going to talk
Good
about
about.
in,
Mm-hmm.
in our next episode on
Mm-hmm.
anarchy. You know, it's not going to come from that.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to it's going to come from the people on the ground level who are creating something for their neighborhood, for their community.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, democracy on a large scale often tends to fail.
Right.
Just look at what we have
That's
now.
right. Right.
So, like I said, we're going to have to wind down the American empire
Mm-hmm.
and wind down this giant representative system that really isn't a democracy at all.
No. Right.
And you're going to have to do something on smaller levels, on a smaller degree, and
Mm-hmm.
find what works for the people where they are.
Right.
In every community at every level, and try to create a general sense of unity through that.
Mm-hmm.
Of trying to create something for the people in every community at every level.
Right.
That's how this is going to go.
Mm-hmm.
Because as long as you try to create these, giant sweeping
Sweeping.
mandates,
Right.
these generalizations, you're creating.
Right.
You're creating the prisons.
Mm-hmm.
You're creating the criminals. You're creating those problems because you're not really addressing the people. You're
Right.
addressing the system.
Right.
The group.
Right. The groups. The generalization that makes you lazy. It actually really requires nothing of you. To have these these swooping ideas for every for
Mhm.
every people. That's not how this is going to work. And you could just look at these 50 states,
Mhm.
right? What's needed, in a New Orleans, Louisiana, with its water and
Mhm.
waterways. It's very different from what is needed in a Wyoming,
Mhm.
in a Cheyenne. You understand me? So we have to be able to address, the issue, with the all of the water in New Orleans and versus, all of the issues that are in a Wyoming.
Mhm.
And it needs to be addressed by the people who are there. Like, they would know. Like, those who are dealing with the water would know.
Yeah.
So the answers can't come from elsewhere. It needs to be
Some
derived.
people who don't live there,
Right.
don't really understand what's going on.
Right. It needs to be derived right from, the people themselves. And that's
Mhm.
what we're
saying.
talking about.
That's mean that anarchy.
Right.
You're creating, a communal system
Mm-hmm.
that prioritizes the individual,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where there is no one ruler, where
Right.
there is no one ruling body, no
Right.
one group,
Right.
no party. It's just people.
Communal? Is that socialism? you know, we don't want socialism.
Well, it is.
It's only socialism when it's the people. As long as big corporations and big governments getting it, it's all fine. But
it's capitalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But yeah, that's really that's when I first read this.
Mm-hmm.
That really helped to. It really
crystallize.
It helped to crystallize and solidify exactly what the problem was.
Mm-hmm.
It's that separation.
Mm-hmm.
It's that space.
Right.
That allows for the corruption inside of our governments to fester.
Right.
Because they are not truly being held accountable to their people.
Right.
We are always being held accountable to them.
Right.
Because they own the violence.
Right. Correct.
Right, and we move.
They have the power to,
They have the power,
to put you in jail and all those other things.
They do all that stuff, right? And the only way we try to, confront and respond is by utilizing violence of our own,
Mm-hmm.
but it only further entrenches us
Right.
into this system.
Right.
So it's going to take, instead of, like we said, infrastructure, it's going to take buildings, it's going to take communities,
Mm-hmm.
level by level. It's going to take a gradual move, a shift of perspective. Like I said, it's not something that happens overnight.
Right.
Like I said, it's not these grand sweeping generalizations.
Mm-hmm.
It's these small things that happen that has to continue to happen again and again and again all over the
Right.
country.
It's like the you know it's like the working out and losing weight gym type stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you have to do it, every day. What they tell you, consistency,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then when you get, the desired figure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Guess what you got to do? You still got to keep working at it
Mm-hmm.
in order to maintain
Yeah.
your desired figure. So it's constant work, you know, little by little, every day. It's
Mm-hmm.
like trying to move the mountain, right?
Yeah.
It's the pebble at a time. There isn't some big giant thing that's going to swoop this whole mountain. That'd be great,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not what it is.
And if it exists, it'll do a shoddy job, and they'll probably create more problems
Yeah.
than it answers.
Right. Correct. So that's what we mean, by that shift in
Yeah, that's what I
perspective.
mean.
Is that
Shifting the mentality, shifting the thinking
that's where the work actually lies.
on a communal level,
Yeah,
on a small level,
on a
right
small
here,
level.
right where you are.
How you think, because I always say that thinking is a verb. It's an action verb too,
Mm-hmm.
besides it being a gerund, but it's an action verb as well, because it's the thing that you like. The way that you think,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to see that reflected on the outside.
Yeah.
And so right now we see what's being reflected on the outside, right? Because we know how those folks think. We know how people think.
Mm-hmm.
This is why, we're having the problems that we're having, because we see how people think. And much of what we want to see a change, in the aesthetic,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you're only going to get that by changing the shifted perspective in how you think.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that doesn't sound.
Well,
It doesn't sound rough. It doesn't. It sounds like, oh,
it
you
is.
soft.
It's a slow, gradual thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
not, like I said. We are addicted to action.
Mm-hmm.
And we're addicted to action in a very specific way.
Mm-hmm.
We're addicted to doing it like this and going about it like this. And it's like I said, you think you're going to be able to do that and get everything you're looking for. You want your cake and be able to eat it too.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be able to beat them. But
Right.
that's not how this is going to work.
Right.
If you want something else, you have to do something else.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be like these big grand gestures. It's small things.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to first. Like I said, this passage here in Brother Karamazov, I think, goes towards the impetus on where this comes from.
Right.
You have to first be able to recognize, the problems in yourself,
Right.
and to be able to see it anywhere else. Like
And recognizing the problem in yourself does not mean to blame yourself.
Yeah, you're not blaming.
You're not blaming yourself. Because I know where it sounds like you blaming us for our problem. That's not the case at all. It's just that it's about that self-reflection.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're having that self-reflection and allowing yourself to forgive yourself,
Mm-hmm.
allowing yourself to grow. And I know I have my own issues with that.
We all do.
I know,
Mm-hmm.
that I have I have a hard time forgiving myself, because I feel like I should have known better. But that's your work,
Mm-hmm.
and as long as you are working, to shift,
Mm-hmm.
to make those moves, that's really all that we can ask. And doing the work individually, we understand it is much harder, to do, but it's not something that can't be done just because it's
the
hard.
only way it'll last.
Right.
It's the only way you're
Right.
ever going to get to
Mhm.
that thing. It's going to require something different of each and every one of us. Like I said, addressing who you are, where you are.
Right.
That's what I mean by anarchy. It's not about going to a leader. It's not about going to a broken system or
Mm-hmm.
going to trying to call up your senator or whatever.
Right.
No, you know, and it's also not about not doing those things either.
Right. Right.
But it's about understanding that this is I think a quote from the first Dune book where
Mm-hmm.
where a letter says you don't complain about justice that you can make for yourself.
Right.
You never complain about something that you can do for yourself. As
Mm-hmm.
long as you have the apparatus to do it, you have no excuse
Mm-hmm.
for not doing it.
Right. And we actually, I always say that, I like to use the term enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have, you know, we have engineers among us. We have them right now in spite of everything that has occurred.
Mm-hmm.
We have engineers among us. We have doctors. We have, all of the trades. You name it, we have it right now. Right now. The thing that we don't have is the shifted perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That's why, you're still going on the outside, to try and move yourself and put yourself in a better situation. So in this case, it's going to require
That's what I'm saying. That
much more
yeah,
work of you, the individual, to see and to have a vision that's not
like I said, smaller, more
that's not there.
incremental, smaller, more incremental steps.
Hmm.
But those are the things that matter.
Right.
Addressing the people, whether like we said, when you showed that article about the
The
19 black families that
right.
that bought like 97 acres and have
Hmm.
done that. Like that. That's what we're talking about.
Right.
These small things. That's not something you just do overnight, but you're
Right.
going to have to continue to do
Hmm.
forever and always.
Right. Because they're
You
literally
know,
starting from. I mean, they just
starting from scratch. That's what I'm
scratch.
saying.
Hmm.
That's what we mean. Addressing, the issues as they are in the community,
Hmm.
as a people, continually,
Right.
gradually.
Hmm.
You're going to have to keep doing that.
Hmm.
It's not about creating some giant, all-encompassing system that can get everybody,
Hmm.
because that, like I said, that creates the social hierarchies. That
All right.
creates the problems.
Hmm.
You do something smaller, little gradual for every community. Something a bit more, like we said, something a bit more communal for the
Hmm.
people there.
Hmm.
That's what I mean by anarchy.
Hmm.
Like I said, it's not rebelling against
Right.
the rules;
Right.
it's against rulers.
Right. It's not
It's
the
against
purge.
it's not
Right.
madness. It's not
It's not Bane
you
coming in.
know
Even though I
spray
like Bane.
painting
Right.
an A on the side of a building and
Right.
stuff like that. That's not what we're talking about.
Right. Right.
We're talking about actual systemic change
Hmm.
that happens on a much slower, much more gradual level,
Hmm.
but something that can last. And I'm saying slow because I just assume,
Right. Right.
but I don't know.
Yeah.
Once
Slow is relative.
slow is relative,
Right.
yeah.
The slow is relative.
Like I said in the book, slowly but still surely.
Yes.
A lot faster than it would be happening if you didn't have any idea
Hmm.
of what it is you were trying to
Right.
do.
And understand that, particularly, for the families that are now, I think they're like 130 miles outside of Atlanta. I don't know the
Hmm.
exact location where they are, right?
Hmm.
And when I say that they're starting from scratch, what I mean is that they have experience. They're not coming there with nothing.
Hmm.
They are doing this with the knowledge and the experience. They're taking that with them,
Yeah, but
so
it
now they
was more
know
with the mindset.
with the mindset, right,
Hmm.
of what it is that they want to do. So this idea, I always, the retreat, the starting over, you know, going back.
Hmm.
It's not going back to nothing.
Hmm.
You know, you're going back with another mindset,
Hmm.
with that knowledge, with that experience. So you're never,
Of not trying to create giant
right,
unilateral sweeping gestures.
right,
You're doing something for you where you are.
right.
That's what we mean by anarchy.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I mean by like true democracy.
Democracy, right.
That happens on a slow level, community by community.
Mm-hmm.
That helps to rectify the issues. You shift your perspective on these things, then you won't have to worry about, crime and
Right,
prison, stuff
right.
like that.
And the idea of unity, like I remember talking with your dad or something, and I mentioned that it's not about us thinking alike.
Hmm.
It's about us thinking together,
Yeah.
right? And so that's what, this conversation, I think, lends itself to, is that, you know, I understand that people have their own feelings, their own thoughts, those,
Hmm.
their own thing, but it's about working together.
And it's about tempering
Mm-hmm.
that with the aware, like I said before,
Right.
that everyone has to live in the consequence
Consequences
of it.
of, right.
So in conclusion, what we're saying here is that this has to work, for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that we can truly make this last is by creating something for the people where the people are in every place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you can only do that if you address that separation. You address it and acknowledge it, the
Mm-hmm.
separation between, church and
Just
state,
state, right.
between the
People
people
in
and
government,
government.
right. Mm-hmm.
That governments have a vested interest in maintaining itself.
Right.
And that always, always at some point is going to come at the cost,
Right.
at the posterity of the people.
Mm-hmm.
So you had like a culture of culturelessness,
Mm-hmm.
a government of
Let's,
governmentlessness, whatever.
right.
You know, it's about resisting
Mm-hmm.
those things,
Mm-hmm.
and acknowledging when they are happening
Mm-hmm.
and being able to
To address
curtail
it,
it.
right.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, and it's small, it's incremental, it's not like these giant sweeping things. It's not burning buildings and doing all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It may not seem like it's the work, especially because, we've never really talked in this language before. We've
Right.
only talked in that language.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a new way of going about
Mm-hmm.
things. But as I see it, it's the only way that you can actually create
Mm-hmm.
something that lasts, that
Right.
stands the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
There's something for the people, and like you said, that it's not about all of us, thinking as one people, all
Right.
of us,
Thinking
thinking the
alike,
same,
right.
thinking
Mm-hmm.
like it's all about just being on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said before when we were discussing this, is that there's no one way to be a person, but
Mm-hmm.
there is one way to treat a person,
Right.
right? There are some things about this that are, inexorable,
Mm-hmm.
inalienable,
Right.
non-negotiable.
Right.
Things about like decency,
Mm-hmm.
respect,
Right.
self-control,
Mm-hmm.
those things.
Right.
And that's what I mean about tempering your knowledge, your awareness, and the
Mm-hmm.
things that you do.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you're working from that basis,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, of the immovable,
Right.
those things, and working from that basis, then everything else is going to fall into
Mm-hmm.
place.
And
Everything
when
else.
when a problem arises, because they will arise,
Hmm.
that you will be able to address that issue, and you'll be able to address it in the proper manner, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something in another way. You'll be able to
Yeah.
address it in another way.
Right. And that,
Something that
yes.
doesn't directly lead to, like, say, cutting people's heads off.
Right. Right.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's episode. Thank you for
Yeah.
listening.
So
And if you
thank you
have
for
any, yeah,
listening.
if
If
you
you
have
have
any
any
comments,
questions,
and
comments,
questions,
concerns,
mhm,
hit us
yeah,
up.
thank you.
Thank you.